Hello, I'm Robert Charetta, the producer of The Inner Loop, the program that focuses on local news for those who live inside the Beltway of Washington, D.C., but particularly for our Northern Virginia community. In this installment, we thought we would examine the failure of one of the most important elements of our democracy, local elections. For those who doubt that it has failed, you have only to look at the numbers. University of Wisconsin researchers looked at elections data covering 144 cities across the U.S., depicting a decline in voter turnout, and found just an average of 21% of cities' voting age population cast their ballot. Turnout for primary and general local elections fluctuates from year to year, of course, depending on the interest, but long-term trends in many larger cities suggest voter interest continues to wane. So who votes? Well, a study conducted by Portland State University tallied voter turnout in the most recent mayoral elections in the 30 largest cities. It found that residents who were 65 years and older, on median, of 7 times more likely to vote than those ages 18 to 34, who frequently registered turnout rates in the single digits. So, only older people with lots of time in their hands, apparently, and perhaps more experience with democracy in general, vote far more frequently. How about immigrants and family members of those who recently migrated to our nation and our area? Well, many cannot register, of course, until they become citizens. But even once they do, they often find the prospect of understanding local elections and political races off-putting and daunting. That's not their fault. It is confusing even for those who have lived here all their lives and try to follow politics as best they can. And according to one survey, immigrants who recently studied to pass their citizen tests know more about our democracy than the average university student here in the U.S. So again, who really does vote? In truth, the largest percent of turnout in occupational terms, which is rarely studied, are those with a direct, vested interest, such as local government employees, school teachers, administrators in schools and all through government, and of course employees of government, and other vitally interested parties such as government contractors, vendors, consultants, and others who make money by supplying or working directly with government employees. In other words, those who benefit the most directly from the local government budget expenditures and their family members, as opposed to those taxpayers who foot the bill. And we believe that if you added up all the registered voters from the families of those interested parties, you would have more than the necessary number of votes needed to elect those local officials. No wonder there are so many voices in local government who are calling for fiscal prudence when it comes to the salaries, health care, pensions, and other benefits being afforded and often raised frequently for these local government workers. Those of us, few non-government related taxpayers who do vote in local elections or who have served as election officers, as I have, are dismayed by the empty halls and low voter turnout we experience when we go into the local voting locations. So we at Inner Loop began to wonder why this was and if anything could be done about it. We began by attending numerous events in our area to see local politics in action and get a better sense of what has gone wrong. At one event recently organized in Northern Virginia on a Saturday afternoon in October, we took our cameras and questioned some of those running for office. That event featured 15 people who are all candidates for office. You will see a number of them in action later in this broadcast, and what I consider to be their pathetic reaction to our questions. But more on that later. First, let's talk about the race to come and the officers that are running to win. They're called delegates, to be exact, which prompts our first question. Do most Americans understand the difference between their representatives sent to Congress versus the representatives they send to their state capitals? According to another survey released less than a year ago by Johns Hopkins University, 1 out of 3 people cannot name their governor. So let's stop there a second and have something we're going to call our viewership local political pop quiz. For you viewers out there, can those of you watching our program name the governor of your state? Of course you can. Good for you. You are one of the informed 2/3 of that survey. How about, though, your 2 senators representing your state in Congress? I'll give you a few seconds for that one. Took you a second or two to think about it. But good for you, I knew you would remember. But that same survey also found that 4 out of 5 citizens, that's 80% of the registered voters, can't say who their state legislator is. So now, let me ask you, can you name your state legislator? Not as easy, is it? Well, welcome to a very big club of uninformed, disengaged, politically discouraged Americans. But don't feel that bad, because you see, we at the Inner Loop have been thinking about this subject for a long time. And guess what our number one conclusion is? It's not your fault. There is a variety of reasons why most people are totally out of sync when it comes to local politics and elections. It's not just that we were all too busy and we don't have enough time and inclination to find out. Yes, it is partially true that citizens have some responsibility to be better informed themselves. But a much bigger reason is that the entire local electoral process is obscure and perhaps purposely made difficult to understand, or at least no effort made to clarify. Did I say purposely? I submit 3 pieces of evidence for that point. Number 1, these political offices seem to have little to do with our lives because their work and the resulting legislation is made remote from all of us. The papers and no other means carry it. 2, the entire election process is very confusing for the average citizen. More on that later. And 3, there is no one, and I really mean no one anymore, who is effectively trying to help citizens understand and participate in the local election process. A case in point was that very Saturday afternoon when we attended the Candidates Forum, which produced those 15 contenders all vying for election to the Virginia government. It was sponsored by the Multicultural Chambers of Commerce Alliance, which was composed of chambers representing Asian Americans, Hispanic Americans, and Black Americans in Northern Virginia, and hosted by a local university. Now, on one hand, I give credit to those organizing this event, but on the other hand, even their chamber and university presidents could not answer or were confused by our simple questions. How many positions were available for election this year? How many candidates were running in total? How many can be elected from each district? How long are their terms of office? So let's get back to our television audience pop local political quiz for those of you watching. What is the name we use in Virginia to describe our local representatives? That's right, I even mentioned it before, delegates. How many of those seats are available in Virginia's General Assembly? That's a tougher one, yes? Well, the General Assembly is a bicameral body consisting of a lower house, which is the Virginia House of Delegates, which has 100 members, and an upper house, the Senate of Virginia, with 40 members. All 140 seats in the General Assembly are on the ballot this year. All of 100 seats in the Virginia House of Delegates, and there are 12 incumbents who are not running for re-election in 2019. But for candidates, there are a total of 176 across the Commonwealth, all hoping to be elected or re-elected this year. Got that? Oh, by the way, their terms run for 2 years each. But back to our candidates forum. This electoral information that I just described should have been enunciated and made available for all audience participants so that citizens in the audience could listen and learn with some sense of relevance and understanding of the context in which these candidates spoke. None was provided. So on this score, I would have to give the hosting organizations an F in education, particularly in presentation and public speaking skills. They just didn't do their homework. But what was the turnout like for those 15 candidates assembled to present themselves to the public at large? Well, with 3 chambers of commerce and 1 university all combining to market the event to Northern Virginia, and very nice weather that Saturday afternoon, the turnout was paltry at best. If you actually subtract the 15 candidates themselves sitting in the audience, their staff members, even some family members, and the 2 or 3 of us representing the media, there was no more than a handful of onlookers at best. In a last-ditch effort to fortify the ranks, the university president apparently made a call and took the podium to declare that her students were interested in the event. And on cue, a professor led and escorted in a procession of 10 reluctant-looking students who took their seats at the back of the room. We couldn't help but notice, but immediately after the professor left, all the students quickly took the opportunity to exit the room out the back door. Embarrassing. So, for another pop local politics quiz question for our television audience, what Virginia district do you happen to be in? Warning, it's a trick question. I'll wait. Don't know? Give up? No wonder you were baffled, because it turns out your district for your state delegate is different than that for your state senator. Isn't that special? Talk about trying to make life confusing. You would think someone in the Virginia General Assembly would say, wait a second, we've got to make this simpler and easier to understand for the average citizen. But perhaps they really don't all want to. And incidentally, the districts themselves are so confusing and gerrymandered by the 2 political parties that it would be impossible for an average citizen to follow. Just listen to some of the candidates on that podium try to describe which communities they represent.
I'm Kathy Tran, and I have the honor of representing the 42nd House District in the Virginia House of Delegates. The 42nd District lies entirely within Fairfax County, and it includes portions of Mount Vernon, Lorton, Fairfax Station, and Springfield.
The 67th District of Virginia, which is pretty much across the street. I orient myself here. We're very close to the 67th District. It spans from parts of Oakton, parts of southern Herndon, Chantilly, Centerville, and Fairfax County, all the way out to Loudoun County, South Riding area.
Laughable if it wasn't such a shame. And the university hosting this event couldn't go to the trouble of presenting a map, perhaps, of the districts on the 2 giant screens standing in the front of the room on equal sides of the podium. Again, another F, this time in audio-visual presentation. Speaking of gerrymandering, these are the last elections before the state government redraws congressional state legislature districts after the 2020 census. If the Democrats win the House and the Senate this year, they will have, in effect, full control over Virginia's government during redistricting. But it really doesn't matter what party's in charge. You see, both parties, or rather the members of both parties, have no real interest in making these elections fair, nonpartisan, or easier to participate in. Incumbents want to get reelected regardless of their party, And they will work and agree with their political opponents over that issue, if none other. Let's keep districting confusing and complex to assure my reelection and your reelection, no matter how unseemly and perverted the process. Now you know why, as a tradition here in the U.S., we always hold our elections immediately after Halloween. We get tricked and the politicians get the treats. According to the Americans and Representatives poll conducted by Haven Insights based on an April 2017 survey of public opinion polls exploring civic literacy and Americans' understanding of their government and relevant issues, in general, Americans aren't likely to know much about their congressional district's representatives at all. Only 1/3 of Americans can name their representative. 23% of Americans who voted for a representative last November, that means they actually took the trouble to go to the polling stations, but now they cannot even name them. And just over half of Americans actually know their representative's party affiliation, which means a lot of people are voting this way. You know, two reasons cited for this knowledge void are the nationalization of politics, which is taking place across the country with social media's help, and the fact that the media's coverage, the traditional media of it, has shifted resources away from the state and local levels. With the decimation of advertising revenues caused by the internet and the collapse of newspapers, both in small towns and large metropolitan areas, the media's watchdog role in state governments has weakened significantly. According to a 2014 Pew Research Center report, the number of full-time State House reporters has declined by more than 1/3 since 2003. I can tell you that in the last 5 years, I think it's another 1/3. So we're down to less than 1/3 of what we used to be. Selena Stewart, the Director of Advocacy and Litigation for the League of Women Voters, says the survey results are disappointing, particularly given that so many decisions made at the state level directly impact the everyday lives of Americans. Indeed, all this inattention can have negative consequences for governments and voters. It could lead to corruption going unnoticed, and that can ultimately cost taxpayers significant amounts of money. Another recent study from the University of Illinois at Chicago and University of Notre Dame looked at the relationship between public finance and newspaper closures and found that municipal borrowing costs increased over 0.1% after a newspaper shuttered. The reason for the surcharge, researchers said, was likely because a local newspaper closure creates a local information vacuum that makes it more difficult for potential lenders, by the way, and the rating agencies, to evaluate both the quality of the investment and the government officials in charge and what they're up to, especially if you don't know what scandals are brewing. As a result, lenders charge the government a higher interest rate on its debt. By the way, speaking of interest rates, have you done what most homeowners like I have done in Fairfax here in recent years? Lowered your interest rates by refinancing your mortgage. I have done it twice on my home, and yet that monthly payment of mine continues to rise each year. But not because of the bank payments, but rather because our Fairfax County tax bill continues to rise significantly. As the county budget has more than doubled over the last 20 years. By the way, has your income doubled in that time? Let's look at some of those issues. The $3 billion Fairfax County school budget alone has a bloated administration of over 23,000 employees now. And guess what? Those employees will be able to retire at the age of 55. That sounds pretty young, doesn't it? And to make life even easier for them, the county increased the taxpayer contribution of ours to their health and pension plans by over 300% in the last 20 years. And how do you like paying those tolls on Route 66 during rush hours? Well, get ready, because the Inner Loop believes that Those tolls will be coming more frequently on many more highways soon, now that the politicians have realized how easy those tolling booths are to install. So while taxpayers and ordinary citizens are distracted and ill-informed about the election process, the local politicians keep raising their taxes and sharing the proceeds with all their many real constituents, their fellow government employees, contractors, and consultants. So let's be clear, as I said from the beginning. These chambers and the university have at least made an effort to inform the public, and for that they should be given credit. But what we need are responsible citizen groups, perhaps funded by the Virginia government, who will step in to hold forums and properly educate voters, not just wave the flag of democracy as it is failing the public's understanding of this process. It is not enough to say that, well, it's the fault of the citizens and they should be expected to do their own research on the local political issues. When I suggested that these matters were confusing for average citizens at that forum, one of the candidate's staff members suggested that citizens should go to a website. While I used all my strength to restrain myself from responding to that idiotic comment as I really wanted to, I did retort that most citizens will never learn about these websites unless we guide them there. This should be a local government's responsibility. Today's media is no longer covering these matters, so we better find a way to force our elected local representatives to have debates and present themselves for questioning, just as we do at the national stage. When I raised these issues out loud, not one of the candidates responded in an intelligent, coherent way, which suggests to me that if we were to elect any of them, most of them would be no more help to the average citizens than those who already occupy the Virginia General Assembly. Interesting to note, however, that the one exception, the one candidate that impressed us with serious thinking, was someone who was formerly a journalist with local newspapers, having written hundreds and even several thousand articles on local issues. So she did her homework. But somehow, some way, we're going to have to take this matter up with our own hands. Perhaps the best answer will be in converting our present electoral process entirely. Personally, I now believe that what we need in our nation is even a more radical reform of democracy, moving to something called a direct democracy, one which takes more power out of the hands of our elected representatives and places more power into the hands of citizens, who can vote on big-ticket items and issues with referendums. For example, should we raise taxes? Should Fairfax County rename schools and take down monuments? How about gun control? How about should we give teachers a raise? And should we put tolls on this or that highway? Oh, some of you will say, good heavens, that kind of democracy sounds dangerous. Yes, as our founding fathers knew, democracy is dangerous. It comes at a price and with the risk of allowing the great unwashed the right and power to make choices about their own future. You know, Benjamin Franklin, upon exiting the Constitutional Convention, was approached by a group of citizens asking what sort of government those delegates were creating in there. His answer was brief and to the point. A republic, he said, if you can keep it. That's it for this episode, but I can tell you in future installments of the Inner Loop, we will examine the Fairfax County budget and their new strategic plan for the county. Wait till you see that. But that's all for now. I'm Robert Sciaretta. Keep your eyes open, and we'll see you next time. Hello, I'm Robert Sciaretta, the president of the Falls Church Cable Access Corporation. As you have heard, free speech and journalism are under attack. Charges of fake news are leveled from the right, and political correctness is demanded from the left. Well, FCCAC represents the citizens of Falls Church who wish to become television producers and commentators and wish to express themselves through this medium of television. You know, much of what you see in this television station is purchased by our nonprofit organization without any tax revenues from Falls Church citizens or others, just so ordinary citizens can speak their mind. And guess what? Many of those citizens are business people like you. In fact, we need your help, you, the executives running your small business, medium or large, to show your support for our station and the concept of freedom of speech, while simultaneously announcing your company's name to our television audience here throughout the Falls Church community. We call this arrangement the Falls Church Public Access Program's sponsorship. With a very small donation, you will see and hear your company's name thanked repeatedly during the broadcast day. Your company will be acknowledged for making our programming possible and for defending the right of citizens to exercise their right to free speech, the bedrock of American democracy. So let's get you started with a terrific way to gain visibility for your company while simultaneously supporting this worthy cause. You see the information below, and you can call or email us with any questions you might have about our rates and how your company's announcement may appear. It's time for you to support these citizens. It's time for you to support free speech, and it's time for you to show where your company stands. Thank you.